الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Now continuing with the section regarding Azan. Just a quick recap of what we discussed in last week's lesson. In last week's lesson, I mentioned how Azan became prescribed for the Muslim Ummah, and I quoted the hadith from Sahih or from Sunan Abu Dawood and from Sunan Tirmidhi regarding the dream seen by Hazrat Abdullah bin Zayd bin Abdi Rabbihi, seeing a person wearing two green garments, and he instructing Abdullah bin Zayd bin Abdi Rabbihi that instead of using a naqus, which is a kind of bell which the Christians use to call people for Sunday Mass, instead of using that to call people for Salah, we should instead call the Azan. And then he taught Abdullah bin Zayd bin Abdi Rabbihi the words of the Azan. Thereafter, I went on to mention some virtues and some fadail of giving Azan. And thereafter, we were looking at some rulings and some maslas with regards to Azan. And we're going to continue by looking at some rulings and some masail regarding Azan. And the first ruling which we're going to look at in today's lesson is what is the masla and what is the ruling when it comes to giving Azan when you are praying Salah or Namaz by yourself at home. Obviously, we should try our best to read namaz and pray namaz with congregation and with jamaat. But just say, for example, we are either doing congregation or jamaat at home, or for some reason we missed the congregation or jamaat, and we are now praying namaz at home. So what is the masla with regards to giving azan and giving iqamat? Is it still considered a sunnah to give azan or iqamat, or can we omit? Now the jurists, the fuqaha, they have said that this particular masla has three possibilities. The first possibility is that you are a muqim. Muqim is someone who is not a musafir, someone who is not a traveler, and someone who is living within the boundaries of the city. So if a person who is a muqim and in his area there is a masjid nearby where the azan and the iqamat takes place. So there is a masjid nearby or within his area or within his vicinity where the 5 azan and the 5 iqamat takes place. So let's just give an example. Just say someone living in the area of Moseley, just say living on this road next door, Clifton Road. Just say someone is living there, so he is praying Salah at home. So because this masjid happens to be the nearest masjid in his vicinity or in his area, and the azan and the iqamat takes place for every prayer. So therefore, if he is, say, for example, reading Maghrib Salah at home, it is mustahab for him, desirable for him, to give azan and iqamat. That is mustahab and desirable for him to give azan and iqamat. Does that make sense? So it's mustahab for him to give azan and iqamat. Okay, so that is the masla. Now the second situation is that if a person is giving azan, the second situation is that if a person who is a muqim and is living in an area where there is no masjid within his vicinity. So there is no masjid within his vicinity. So just say, for example, like, say, Castle Bromwich, or say Yardley, where there's hardly any actually masajid around. So just say, for example, if a person is living in an area where there isn't any masjid within his vicinity, then it is sunnat-e muakkada, emphasized sunnah, to give both azan and iqamat when he is praying at home. Just say somewhere like Yardley, where Yardley Green, around that side of Birmingham, where there's not that many masajid, not that many Muslims, So if a person, most likely he'll be reading Salah at home. So if he's saying praying his Isha Salah at home, then it is sunnat muakkada to give both azan and to give both iqamah. Both of them are sunnat muakkada. And to omit, say even the iqamah will be considered makruh and severely disliked. Okay? And the third situation is that if someone is a musafir or a traveler, so he's outside the city, so just as example, he's on the service station, stopped over at service station, or like for example, he's traveling in the desert or somewhere, then the fuqaha and the jurists have said that it is sunnat muakkada, emphasize sunnah, to give both the azan and the iqamah. Okay, so it's emphasize sunnah to give both the azan and the iqamah. And the reason why it's sunnat muakkada to give both an azan and iqamah is because when you are a traveler and just say you've gone to a desert or let's say somewhere remote where there are hardly any people there. So if you were to give the azan and if you were to call people loudly, then there may be a possibility that there may be some of the Muslims there who hear the azan and think, oh, there's some Muslims here and let's go and read namaz, and then you could like get a congregation and get the reward and the sawab and so on. That's why the scholars have said that even when you are traveling, it is sunnat muakkada to give both azan and iqamat. And the very least, the aqal is that you give at least the iqamat and not the azan when you are traveling. So that is the masla with regards to giving azan and iqamat when you are alone. The next ruling here is the method of giving azan. What is the sunnah way of giving azan? Now the sunnah way of giving azan is that the azan should be called in a loud voice. Okay, so whoever is giving azan, they should give the azan in a loud voice. The second sunnah when giving the azan is that after every phrase, you should pause for a little while so that the listener can repeat or can answer to the azan. I'm going to look at this in the next section, something which is known as ijaba. Whenever the muazzin gives the azan, then it is mustahab and desirable for us to reply to the azan. So if the muazzin is going 100 miles per hour and you can't even like take a breath yourself between each phrase of the azan, then that is against the sunnah. So it should be like the muazzin, he gives the azan, then after each phrase there should be a pause there so that the listener could actually reply to the azan. And another masla here is that it is mustahab that when you are giving azan and when you are saying the hayya al salah, you turn to the right, and when you are saying hayya al falah, you turn to the left. And it is also mustahab and desirable that when you are giving azan, you put your index finger, the right index finger in your right ear and your left index finger in the left ear, you put that inside the ear when you are saying the azan. And again, the hikmah and the wisdom behind that is so that, and you probably realize this as well, that when you put the index finger in your ear and if you were to call or if you were to say anything, you could actually generate more sound. That's why it's mustahab and desirable that when you are giving azan, you have both the index finger inside the ears and you're saying the azan loudly to generate more sound to that particular azan. So that is with regards to the method of giving azan. The next section here is with regards to iqamah. So we've looked at azan. Now the second thing here is with regards to iqamah. They go both hand in hand. Now what is iqamah? Now iqamah, again, the words more or less are similar to the azan, but we give iqamah just as another reminder to everyone that the Jamaat and the congregation is about to start. The azan is given to make everyone aware that Salah time has begun. So get ready if you are at work, close the shop quickly and we're going to start Salah. And then the iqamat is given just to, like a final reminder that the congregation and the Jamaat is about to start. Now like azan, iqamat is also sunnat muakkada and is also emphasized sunnah for the 5 daily prayers as we're going to look at in the text. Now the only difference in Iqamah is that after you said Hayya ala salah and Hayya ala falah, you add an extra phrase, and that is Qad qamati salah, Qad qamati salah. So you add that on. When it comes to Iqamah, you will not put your fingers in your ears. And another important ruling or etiquette which a lot of people, a lot of Muazzins drop out and don't do at all, is that the same way in Azan, when you say Hayya ala Salah, you turn your face to the right. Even when you are giving Iqamah, it is also mustahab and desirable that you turn your face to the right as well. So when you are giving Iqamah, so you turn your face to the right and you say Hayya ala Salah, Hayya ala Salah, Hayya ala Falah, Hayya ala Falah, Qad qamati Salah, Qad qamati Salah, and then you finish off the Iqamah. A lot of Muazzins, they miss this sunnah out, they miss this kind of adab and etiquette out. And it's very important that, because if we're going to, and this is applies to everything, because when you start doing things against the sunnah, then it kind of has effect on the salah which you're going to read afterwards. So if you are doing things like the azan and the iqamat against the etiquette and against the sunnah, then it has an effect in terms of how much reward you can potentially gain from the subsequent prayer and salah which you're going to read after. So it's very important that these kind of small etiquettes or sunnahs which we think to be small, but in fact is very important when it comes to performing the iqamat. Now the third issue here after iqamat is something which is known as al-ijaba, replying to the azan. Now I'll just mention some hadiths which talks about the importance of replying to the azan and how virtuous this particular deed and action is. And it's mentioned in a hadith of Sahih al-Muslim and Sunnah Abu Dawood, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that whoever repeats the words of the muazzin with conviction, with sincerity, then he will enter Jannah and paradise. So look at that, how easy this particular deed is. The muazzin, you don't even have to know the words of the azan. What you just have to do, whatever the muazzin says, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, then you just say after him when he gives you that pause or that time for you to say the reply to the azan. So during that pause, during that few seconds, just say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And as you reply to the azan, then as the hadith says, the hadith of Sahih Muslim, so Sahih and it's authentic, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that such a person will enter Jannah and paradise. Now the reply to the azan is more or less straightforward, but there are certain words which are slightly different. What I mean by that is, whatever the muazzin says, you will say the exactly same words. So if the muazzin, when he's doing the azan, says Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, then you should reply by saying Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then when the muazzin says Hayya ala salah and Hayya ala falah, Hayya ala tayn is called in Arabic, then you should say Hawqalatayn, which is La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. So that's how you reply to Hayya ala salah and Hayya ala falah. And the Fajr azan, when the muazzin says as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm, that sleep is better than namaz, salah is better than sleep, then you should reply by saying sadaqta wa bararta, that you are telling the truth, and wa bararta, you are you do good to us. That's more or less the meaning of sadaqta wa bararta. And in iqamat, when the iqamat is also given, it is also mustahab and desirable to also reply to the iqamat as well. Again, this is something which we kind of missed out as well. So when the iqamat even is that, when that is given, so it's also mustahab and desirable that you reply to that. So exactly same in azan. So when you say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, then when we are standing in the saf or in the line, we should also reply to that as well. But the only difference is that obviously when the muazzin says qad qamati salah, qad qamati salah, we should reply by saying aqamahu Allah wa adamaha. So these are the du'as or the things which we should read after reading each phrase or after listening to each phrase of the azan, and also for the iqamat as well. Now this takes me on to the next masla here, or the next issue here, and that is that after the muazzin gives the azan, then it is mentioned in a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari that we should make a dua. And the dua which we should recite is Allahumma rabba hadhi da'wati tamma wa salati al-qa'ima, all the way until the end. Now just a few things with regards to the dua. Sometimes right at the end, آتِ محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. And some people afterwards recite إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. Now that word إنك لا تخلف الميعاد, or that particular phrase, it's not mentioned in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari. It's mentioned in some of the books of hadith and such as Sunan al-Bayhaqi. So what I'm trying to say is that that actual phrase, إِنَّكَ لَا تُخْلِفُ الْمِيعَادِ, is not actually established from any kind of strong source like the first part of the hadith is, because that is established from Sahih al-Bukhari, whereas the last part, إِنَّكَ لَا تُخْلِفُ الْمِيعَادِ, is established from a hadith from Sunan al-Bayhaqi. I'm just mentioning this just for your own information. I'm not trying to say that, oh, don't read it. If somebody does read it, then there's nothing wrong with it. And again, if someone doesn't read that last part, then again, there's nothing wrong with it. So what I'm trying to say is that the first part of the hadith all the way until مَقَامَ مَحْمُودًا الَّذِي وَعَدْتَ, that is mentioned in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, whereas the extra phrase, إِنَّكَ لَا تُخْلِفُ الْمِيعَادِ, that is a hadith of Sunan al-Bayhaqi, not part of the hadith of the Bukhari. That's one issue. The second point here is, some people, again, when they are reading that particular dua, they add some words such as الدرجة الرفيعة وارزقنا شفاعة. الدرجة الرفيعة وارزقنا شفاعة. Now that particular word or phrase, that is not mentioned in any hadith, whether in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, whether in the hadith of Sunan al-Bayhaqi. So therefore the scholars have said that if somebody just reads that extra without deeming it to be a sunnah, without deeming it that this is actually a part of hadith, then it is allowed and permissible. But if someone then starts reading it, الدرجة الرفيعة وارزقنا شفاعة, with the intention that, or this is also part of the hadith, then that will be incorrect and that will be wrong. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't actually say that in the hadith, and then if you start believing, or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this in a hadith, then it will fall under the wa'id, or the severe warning with regard to those people who make up false hadiths and false attributions to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the hadith mentioned in Sahih Muslim says that those who make up false hadiths, فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ, their abode will be in the fire of hell. So you could read it, by all means read it, but don't deem it to be something which is part of the sunnah or the hadith, because if you do deem that, or if you do think that, then it comes under the prohibition of deeming things which are not, or attributing things which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not say. Another masla here with regards to the azan is that when we are reading this dua, Allahumma rabba hadhi da'wati tamma wa salati al-qa'ima, shall we raise our hands when we are reading this dua? So should we raise our hands and say Allahumma rabba hadhi da'wati tamma, and then when we finish the dua, then put the hands on our face? So what is the masla with regards to that? Now to understand this particular masla, Mufti Rashid Ahmad, a very famous Deobandi scholar, has written a book called Ahsan al-Fatawa. In this particular book, he's given us a usul, a principle, where or in which situations or for which du'as we should raise our hands, and for which du'as we should not raise our hands. And the usul and the principle is that those du'as which have been narrated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us to read this particular dua at this time. So just say, for example, when we are going to the toilet, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that before you enter the toilet, you should read the dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith. So the words have been mentioned from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's also mentioned that before you enter the toilet, you should read this dua. It's in the hadith of Sahih Bukhari and other books of hadith. Other du'as such as, for example, before you have intercourse with a wife, then you should read the dua. Again, the dua is mentioned, and also the time is mentioned that before you have intercourse. Similarly, going back to the toilet example again, when we leave the toilet, again the dua is transmitted from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the time is also mentioned as well, that when you are leaving the toilet, you should read this dua. Many other hadiths where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, when you enter Makkah, you should read this dua. When you see the Baytullah, then you should read this dua. When you are doing tawaf, you should read this dua. When you say, for example, are in Arafah, the plain of Arafah, you should read this dua. So those du'as where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us the word, and at the same time, he's given us the time when to read this dua. For those du'as, you don't lift your hand. For those du'as, you just read them as normal, without lifting your hand. So therefore, when we go to the toilet, we don't actually raise our hands, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min khubuthi wal khaba'ith, and then go to the toilet. But when we come out from the toilet, we don't again raise our hands. Obviously, when we are having intercourse with our wife, we don't actually raise our hands for that. So one kind of say is that is the usul. That is the principle. Okay, the joking today. Anyway, so that's the principle. Now the second type of du'as are basically those du'as where the words have been transmitted. So the words have been mentioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the Holy Quran. But the time for those du'as have not been mentioned. Now for those types of du'as, you should raise your hand. And it is sunnah and mustahab to raise your hand. Let's take an example of the du'as which we do after namaz, after salah. So many of the du'as we read like Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina azaban nar. So the words are established from the Quran. That's mentioned in Surah Baqarah. Many of the du'as which we read, Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'a, and so on. So all these are established from the Quran and the Hadith. But the time hasn't been said, or you should do it after namaz. Or the time hasn't said, or do it at this time, or do it, say, after a bayan, or do it after a function, or do it after a wedding. The time hasn't been mentioned. So therefore, for those occasions, it is mustahab and desirable that when we are doing dua, we actually raise our hands. So from this we can understand that the dua which we do after namaz and salah, it's mustahab, desirable to raise your hand. After, say, for example, somebody got married, you do the nikah, and then you raise your hand. That again is mustahab and desirable. So what I'm trying to say is that basically those places where the words have been narrated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or by the Holy Quran, but the time hasn't been said, for those types of du'as, you should raise your hand. Now keeping this principle and usul in mind, let's look at the dua after azan. Allahumma rabba hazi da'wati tamma. So in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned the word. And also in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, it tells us the time when to read this dua, and that is after azan. So therefore, from this usul and principle, we can derive that it is preferable not to raise your hands for this particular dua. If somebody does it, again, if somebody does it, is not doing something unlawful and haram, somebody wants to do it, then you shouldn't tell them you're doing wrong or anything like that, but I'm just telling you what is the ruling, and that is the ruling which our ulamas and our scholars have mentioned. Now just going back to the ijaba masla, replying to the azan. Remember, you only will give reply to the azan if the azan is, how should I describe it? Is it like if the azan is being done at that particular time? Or to if I rephrase it again, if the azan is being done live, like at that particular moment in time. So just say, for example, if a masjid is doing azan on the scanner, so you can hear the azan at home in the scanner, so it is mustahab and desirable that you reply to that particular azan. However, if you hear the azan from the television or from the radio, most of the time the azan which they play on the television, on the radio, is actually pre-recorded. It's like it's done before, and then when the time of Adhan comes, or when the Maghrib time comes, or Zuhr Salah, they just play it on. So therefore, for those types of Adhan, you don't have to reply to the Adhan. So remember, because that's like pre-recorded, you don't have to reply to those kind of Adhan, and it's only for the Adhan which you hear live, whether you're in the masjid or you hear by the scanner, for those types of Adhan you reply. And also another ruling with regards to replying to the Adhan is that, just say for example nowadays, say, like many of us probably have scanners at home, and the scanner is linked or connected to different masajid. So just say for example in the Small East area, you could, like for example, potentially hear the Adhan, say from Comfy Road Masjid. You could also hear the Adhan from Kol Sharif. You could also hear Adhan from the Tennyson Road Masjid and so on. There's 3-4 masjids in the Small East area where with one scanner you can actually hear Adhan from different places. So the question arises that obviously these masajid, they're doing Adhan at different times. So do you have to give reply to every Adhan you hear, or what do you do? So the masla is that whichever Adhan you hear first, you give reply to that. So if you hear, say for example, Comfy Road Masjid doing the Adhan quite early, and you hear that firstly, then you will just give Adhan to that, and there's no need for you to give a reply to the Adhan which you hear from other masajid afterwards. Now just a couple of more issues here before we look at the text. The first issue here, the first masla here is regarding kissing the thumb when you hear the Adhan. Or to be more precise, when Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah is said, then to kiss your thumbs or your fingers and then put it on your eyes. So what is the masla with regards to that? Now with regards to this practice, there is a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Daylami, where it mentions that Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu, the first Caliph of Islam, a close companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once he heard the muazzin say, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, that I testify that Muhammad is Allah's Rasul and Messenger. Upon which Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu, he repeated this phrase, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, he kissed his fingers and then he rubbed it on his eyes. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seeing this, replied that whoever does what my friend has just done, basically whoever does what Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu has just done, wajabat shafa'ati, my intercession will be wajiban, obligatory upon him. So from this we can understand that when you hear the Adhan, and in particular the phrase Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, so if somebody was to kiss his fingers and was to then wipe it over his eyes, then it is something which is established from the Sunnah and the Hadith, and you can say that it is something which is mustahab and desired. Even Mufti Taqi, Damat Barakatuhum, has even mentioned that if somebody genuinely, out of love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he heard that phrase and he couldn't control his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he kisses his fingers and then he puts it on his eyes, or he rubs it on his eyes, then that is something which is allowed and that is something which is permissible, and you can't call it a bid'ah. But then Mufti Taqi Sahib then goes on to mention that, however, if people deem this mustahab and desirable practice to be something necessary, then it becomes a bid'ah and then it becomes a innovation. And from this, I'm just going to slightly move along, is that, remember, something which is mustahab and desirable, if somebody does that, deeming it to be something wajib and something necessary, it's only mustahab. But if you force someone, or you have to do this, you have to do that, then it becomes a bid'ah and then it becomes an innovation. Just keep that in mind. So there are many things which you could say is something which is sunnah and mustahab. Just an example like reading tasbih after namaz. Now if somebody now doesn't do tasbih after namaz and just walks out, Now you stop him, you get hold of his coat and say, oh no, you have to sit down, for tasbih. Then it becomes a bid'ah and then it becomes an innovation. Another good example will be the dua after the azan, which probably look at in detail later on. So again, the dua after azan is something which is mustahab, you could say, desirable. You don't have to do the dua after azan. It's not one of the integral parts of salah. As soon as you do the salam, that's it, your salah and your namaz is done. And if somebody says, no, you have to sit down for the dua and so on, then it becomes a bid'ah and then it becomes innovation. And there's many other things where things which the fuqaha and the jurists or the scholars have said that this is mustahab and desirable, if you deem it to be necessary, then it becomes a bid'ah and innovation. Even like, for example, this kind of dars or this kind of program which you're having. So you could give the da'wah to people that, look, there's going to be a talk or there's going to be a lecture and so on. But if you literally like, saying to someone, oh no, you need to come for this talk or you need to do this, you need to do that, then it becomes a bid'ah and then it becomes innovation because it's not compulsory. This is what we're doing. It's not fun. It's not going to be something which, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask about on the day of judgment. But obviously when it comes to something which is fard and obligatory, such as your prayer, such as giving zakat, such as going hajj once in a lifetime, such as fasting, now if somebody is slacking on those issues, then you can be forceful and say, well, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Then you can be a bit more, harsh and stern on that individual. So something which is desirable, mustahab, then you shouldn't make a big commotion out of it if no one doesn't do it. So they're exactly same with regards to kissing the thumbs or kissing your fingers at the time of giving azan. If somebody does it, then let him do it. You shouldn't cause a problem. You shouldn't cause a commotion regarding that. You shouldn't label him that, oh, you're this, you're that. And similarly, if someone doesn't do it, then you shouldn't then make any big issue or big fuss out of it. And don't deem him or don't start labeling him that you're a Wahhabi or you're this or you're that for not kissing your fingers at the time of azan. So just keep that in mind that this is something which is mustahab and this is something which is desirable. Now we're just going to have a look at the text now. The text is more or less very straightforward and many of the rulings which I've already mentioned has already been covered. Now Imam Quduri rahmatullahi says, Al-azanu sunnatun lis-salawat al-khams wal-jumu'ah duna ma siwaha. The azan is a sunnat muaqqada, is an emphasized sunnah for the 5 daily prayers. And also for the Jummah prayer, duna ma siwaha, and not for any other prayer. So from this we can understand that azan and iqamat only takes place for the 5 daily prayers. And because on Friday, Jummah is in place of the Zuhr Salah, so you do the azan and the iqamat for the Jummah Salah. But besides that, any other prayers, such as Salatul Eid, Janazah prayer, any other prayers and so on, there is no azan and there is no iqamat for those. The next text goes on to say, وَلَا تَرْجِعَ فِيهِ. There is no tarji' in azan. Now this is something which obviously other schools of thought say that you will do when you are performing or when you are saying the azan. Tarji' basically means that there are 4 phrases in the azan which are known as the shahadatain, i.e. bearing witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, and that bearing witness that Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Allah's Rasul and Messenger. Now besides the Hanafi sect, the other schools of thought, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi and Imam Ahmad say that before you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, you should say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah quietly to yourself. So you should say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah quietly, twice, and then say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah loudly again. And the same for the Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, you should say that quietly twice yourself and then say it loudly. So that is known as tarji', to repeat. Now as you can see in the text of Quduri, it says وَلَا تَرْجِعَ فِيهِ, that there is no tarji' when it comes to performing or saying the azan according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi. So what I mean by that is basically you will just read the azan normal, you don't say any phrases quietly, you just say all the phrases as normal. So after you said Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then afterwards, when you are saying the Shahadatain, when you are bearing witness, you will just say as normally, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and then Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. The next text goes on to say, وَيَزِيدُ فِي آذَانِ الْفَجْرِ بَعْدَ الْفَلَاحِ الصَّلَاةُ خَيْرٌ مِنَ النَّوْمِ مَرَّتَيْنِ. That in the azan of Fajr, after Hayya al-Falah, you will add the phrase of Salatu Khayrun Minan Nawm twice. That Salah and prayer is better than sleep. So we looked at this particular masla in last week's lesson. Then he goes on to say, وَالْإِقَامَةُ مِثْلُ الْآذَانِ. That the Iqamat is like the azan. But the difference is, إِلَّا أَنَّهُ يَزِيدُ فِيهَا بَعْدَ حَيَّ الْفَلَاحِ قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ مَرَّتَيْنِ. But the difference is that after Hayya al-Falah, when you are saying the Iqamat, you will just add the phrase قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ twice. He then goes on to say, وَيَتَرَسَّلُ فِي الْآذَانِ وَيَحْضُرُ فِي الْإِقَامَةِ. That the azan will be done leisurely, at a leisurely pace, meaning that you will take your time after each phrase. As I mentioned before, the sunnah procedure and method of performing the azan, that after each phrase, you should pause for a while, for a second, so that the people and the listener can reply to the azan. وَيَحْضُرُ فِي الْإِقَامَةِ. And the iqamat will be done hastily. As you will hasten, you will say a bit more quickly and fastly compared to the azan, which obviously, as I mentioned, will be said in a leisurely pace. Then he goes on to say, وَيَسْتَقْبِلُ بِهِمَا الْقِبْلَةِ. That it is a sunnah that when you are performing azan and the iqamah, that you are facing towards the qibla. فَإِذَا بَلَغَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ وَالْفَلَاحِ حَوَّلَ وَجْهَهُ يَمِينًا وَشِمَالًا. Then the author then goes on to say that when you reach Hayya ala Salah and Hayya al Falah, you will then turn your face to the right and the left. So when you are saying Hayya ala Salah, you will turn your face to the right, and when you are saying Hayya al Falah, you will turn your face to the left. The next text now goes on to talk about if someone has missed his prayer and Salah, then does he have to give azan and iqamat as well or not? So as we can see from the text, that even though you missed your Salah, even though you're doing qaza prayers, it is also mustahab and desirable that you also give the azan and the iqamat. Now there's a couple of ways to look at this particular masla. If you have missed your prayer, just say you missed your Maghrib Salah. Now if you are praying at home, just say you're doing qaza at home where there's no one there, then it is mustahab and desirable, as I mentioned before, because the azan and iqamat has already taken place and you're living in an area where there's a masjid nearby, then it is mustahab to at least give the iqamat and then start the qaza prayer. And as I mentioned before, that if you're living in an area where there is no masjid nearby, then it is sunnah to give actually both azan and the iqamat, even for the qaza prayer. Now what this particular text is telling us, okay, so yeah, that's one way to look at it. And another way to look at it is, you may be doing qaza prayers, something known as qaza umri, which we're going to look at later, where you may have missed, say, I don't know, like 100 namazis since you became baligh and reached the age of puberty. So when you are now doing qaza of these prayers individually, then for those, you can to yourself say the iqamat, just by yourself you can say without saying it loudly. But you shouldn't say it loudly. The reason why is because if you're going to say it loudly, then you are implying to others that you have missed a prayer, you have done qaza of prayer, which is a sin. And as you know, the principle and the usul and the principle is that you should never ever expose your sins to other people. Even though you may have done grave crimes and so on, you should think of it that it's actually a blessing from Allah that He has actually concealed those things. Because we mentioned that those who, expose their sins, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has concealed it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then expose all his faults and all his shortcomings in the hereafter. The little things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pick out in the hereafter and will punish you for those. So that is the masla here. Now the ruling says, وَيُؤَذِّنُ لِلْفَائِتَ وَيُقِيمُ. Fa'ita here means that those prayers which you have missed, which you have done qaza of, then it is a sunnah that you give azan and you also give the iqamat as well. فَإِنْ فَاتَتْهُ صَلَوَاتٍ, then the author goes on to say that if an individual has missed many prayers, more than one, and he's doing qaza of these prayers together, then أُذِّنَ لِلْأُولَى وَأَقَامَ, that for the first prayer which he is praying, he should give the azan and the iqamat, and then for the second prayer and for the remaining one, he's got a choice of giving azan and iqamat, or if he wants, he can just suffice on the iqamat. So let me just quickly explain this ruling. Basically, just say if an individual has missed, say, 3 prayers together. Let's say he was traveling and he missed his Zuhr, Asr and Maghrib prayer. So it's now Isha time and he's now doing qaza. Either he's doing qaza by himself, or this ruling can also apply if he is doing qaza with congregation or with Jamaat. Because it could have been so that you were traveling in a group, but something happened and you were traveling, something happened and you missed your Zuhr, Asr and your Maghrib prayer. Now he's doing qaza of it during Isha time. So the ruling is saying that, you know, the first prayer you're doing qaza of, just say Zuhr. So for that prayer, you should say the azan and the iqamah. And for the other prayers, the other 2 which you're going to be doing qaza of afterwards, i.e. the Asr and the Maghrib, then you've got a choice of giving azan iqamat for those, or if you want, you could just suffice on the iqamah. Then he goes on to say some of the rulings before we finish. وَيَنْبَغِي أَن يُؤَذِّنَ وَيُقِيمَ عَلَى تُخْرِ, that it is mustahab, desirable, that you give azan and the iqamat in the state of taharat and purification, i.e. to be in the state of wudu when you are giving the azan and the iqamat. Then he goes on to say, فَإِنْ أَذَّنَ غَيْرَ وُضُو جَازَ, that if somebody was to give azan without wudu, then it is permissible. So if somebody gave azan without wudu, then it will be allowed. Allowed meaning that the azan which he has given will be considered valid. Because the main thing with regards to the azan is calling or informing people that namaz is about to start, or the namaz time has started. So when you look at it, the actual azan is just like an information, just like a message in a way. And when you are passing message, when you are giving khabar or information, you don't need to be in the state of purification or tahara. That's why the author has said that if somebody gave azan without uzuzu, then it will be jaiz and considered valid. Then he goes on to say that it is makruh to give iqamat ala ghayri wudu'in. However, it's makruh to give the iqamat without wudu. And the reason why it's makruh here is because when you are giving iqamat, you are actually calling people towards the prayer, that the prayer and the congregation is starting. When it comes to azan, you're telling people that the namaz time has started. So get ready, prepare for the namaz prayer. But when you are giving iqamat, you are actually telling people that namaz and salah is about to start. Now, if a person himself is not in the state of wudu, then what is he doing is that he is inviting people to do a deed or a ibadat or an action which he himself at this moment in time can't do. So it then falls under what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ, that you tell people to do good, but then you forget about yourself. I.e., you tell people that, you should be religious, you should come to the masjid and read namaz, but then you don't read namaz yourself. So exactly here as well, that's what they're saying, that the person is giving iqamat, if he was to give it without wudu, then it will be considered makruh, disliked, whereas giving azan without wudu is considered valid, but iqamat without wudu will be considered disliked. Why? Because he is calling people to something, ibadat, which he himself cannot perform at this moment in time. And he also goes on to say, similar to give azan in the state of janaba. Janaba meaning that when you are in need of a bath and so on, just say you had a wet dream, and then you go and give the azan, then to give azan in that particular state will be considered makruh. And then the last ruling of this particular section, Imam Quduri rahmatullah says, وَلَا يُؤَذِّنُ لِصَلَاةٍ قَبْلَ وَقْتِهَا إِلَّا فِي الْفَجْرِ عِنْدَ أَبِي يُوسُف رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. Again, I'm not going to look at this particular ruling in detail. It's something which obviously those who are students in, say, Islamic schools, they tend to look at this particular issue in a bit more detail, but the crux of this issue basically is that you can't give azan before the time has started. So before Isha time starts, you can't give the azan for Isha. Before Fajr starts, you can't give the azan for Fajr. But there is an exception. One of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah's students, Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah, says that you can give the azan before its time only for the Fajr prayer. Only for the Fajr prayer you can give azan before its time. So just say Fajr starts, say, at 5 o'clock in the morning. If you give the azan for the Fajr, say, at 4:30 in the morning, that will be allowed. And what Imam Abu Yusuf rahmatullah has said, there are hadiths for that, but the mainstream Hanafi ulamas and scholars interpret those hadiths to mean that the azan which was given before the time, i.e. before the beginning of Fajr, was in fact azan for tahajjud. So during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam time, obviously for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tahajjud, as many scholars said, was compulsory, and for the rest of the companions, even though it wasn't compulsory for them, but it was their normal habit. Every day they would wake up for the tahajjud prayer. So for them, an extra azan would be given. So therefore, you should not get confused with the azan for tahajjud and for the azan of Fajr. So basically, more or less the ruling of this particular text is saying that you can't give azan before its time, whereas Imam Yusuf rahmatullah says that you can for the Fajr prayer, that you can give it before. But mainstream Hanafi scholars reply by saying that the azan which was given before the Fajr prayer during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam time was azan for the tahajjud prayer and not for the azan for the Fajr prayer. So let's leave it there for this week. My last one will see. So we try to run things that work. ربنا تغفر لنا صلى الله عليه وسلم